As most of you know by now, but I'm sure we have some newbies, I'm Christine Jacobs, and I'm the Executive Director of Represent PA. We are the PAC in Pennsylvania that is solely dedicated to electing pro-choice Democratic women to the state legislature. And our goal, we need somebody's got a dog that go on mute. We are solely dedicating to, as I said, to electing women and to also flipping the chamber with strong professional women. We did a good job in 2020 all along, and we've gotten to the point where we have a Democratic majority in the House, and we won a special election this week, so enabling us to, or last week, enabling us to continue to have our majority. So book banning, and Ronna Dewey will talk about this. We've also talked in the past about why, what's going on in Pennsylvania and the funding of Pennsylvania schools. We like to remind people that Pennsylvania is school funding is the most uneven in Pennsylvania in terms of the discrepancy between rich and poor school districts. And that's because we have an overemphasis on local funding and an underemphasis on funding from the state. The worst. Pennsylvania ranks 30th in the US in terms of quality of public education for all. This year, as part of trying to put together a budget, there was a proposal to put in $100 million for school voucher programs. $100 million. Where would that money come from? It would come out of that public education funding in the state and go right into private school funding. $100 million. Those of you who live in Philadelphia, can you imagine what that would do to construction of new buildings and to getting rid of asbestos in our schools? We need to see school choice for what it is. It's a barely disguised strategy of the Republican Party all over this country to starve public education in this country and to undermine a key segment of support for the Democratic Party, meaning teachers' unions. We have to be clear on this one. It is a problem. So today, we're very excited. We're going to start this morning with Susan Spicka, the Executive Director of Education Voters of Pennsylvania. She is a leader in the world of what's going on in funding of education. And what she works hard to do is to bring about knowledge for people and advocacy by people like you, like voters in Pennsylvania, to bring about an understanding of what goes on in education funding and what you can do about it. Does that sound like a good theme for Represent PA? And we're also pleased to have Ronna Dewey, who's the person who really helped me put together today's discussion. Ronna heads Red, Wine, and Blue, and it's an empowered organization of diverse women across the country who get together and talk about what goes on, how politics affects everyday life, and what you can do about it. Red, Wine, and Blue is an organization you should know about, and it's a strong activist organization, and Ronna heads their PA program. We're going to start with Ronna today, talking about school board extremism and what you can do about it and why you should care. So Ronna, take it away for the next 15 minutes or so.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Christine, for that warm introduction. As she said, I'm Ronna Dewey. I'm the Pennsylvania Program Director for Red, Wine, and Blue. I'm also a mom of 3, and I got really involved in what was happening regarding school boards back in 2021 when there were COVID measures that I was fighting for so that my kids could go back to school. And then suddenly some other topics started coming to light. And here we are now. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's happening in Pennsylvania. So a lot of people have heard about some groups, one in particular called Moms for Liberty, and they try to portray themselves as, you know, we're just moms. We want to make sure our kids are safe, and, you know, we're just fighting for what's right for our family values. But that's not really who they are. So what they really are is a politically motivated group, and they are being run by outside groups and politicians that are heavily invested in confusing and scaring parents, and they're trying to score partisan points and gain political power. So I just mentioned Moms for Liberty. The Southern Poverty Law Center has just declared that they are an anti-government extremist movement. And dating back to 2021, they framed the organization as channeling a powerful frustration among conservative mothers. But in fact, these well-connected partisans are opportunistically manufacturing outrage and selling it to parents under the guise of empowerment. And Christine mentioned this. Why are they doing this? The ultimate goal is to dismantle our public education system in America. So who are some of the other ones? So a lot of people have heard of Moms for Liberty. In Pennsylvania, the Southern Poverty Law Center tracked 51 anti-government movements. So they also include No Left Turn in Education, which is a national group, but they were founded in Pennsylvania. Proud American Patriot Network, the Oath Keepers, Moms for Liberty, the Family Research Council, and the Pennsylvania Volunteer Militia. Scary, right? There's a lot of groups that are really trying to fight against our government. So who are some of the larger funding organizations? We've got the Goldwater Institute, Parents Defending Education, PragerU, the Heritage Foundation, the Leadership Institute, and the Pennsylvania Family Council. And there's this bottom one with a little VE. They're called Vermilion Education, and I will talk about them in a moment. So what are the hot topics in extremism at school districts? And I gotta love my Abbott Elementary little GIF here because such a great representation of public education in Philadelphia. So if you have not seen these at your school district, you will. I can guarantee it, unless we take direct action to make sure this doesn't happen. So book bans and censorship, curricula that rewrites history, attacks on social emotional learning, CRT, critical race theory, and dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And very specific attacks on LGBTQ plus youth, using dog whistles like gender ideology and creation of trans sports and bathroom policies within our schools. So I wanted to give an example of just some of the policies and tactics that are happening when school boards are taken over by extremists. So a lot of people have probably heard about the Central Bucks School District. They have made national news. Some of their, yes, I see, Heidi, two of the worst, these two right here, absolutely. So they have created policies that prevent certain books from being in the library. And when we're talking about book bans, we're not just talking about taking books out of the library and making them unavailable. We're also talking about teachers and librarians and curriculum supervisors being afraid to actually introduce books into the school because they are afraid of the backlash that will happen. We're also talking about teachers or librarians being forced to take a book and put it behind, like off the shelf and behind a desk somewhere, which makes it unavailable technically to students. So it's actually a ban, even though it might be told it's available. Also in Central Bucks, there have been complaints filed by the ACLU that there is a hostile environment for LGBTQ plus students and retaliation on a teacher because of his support of transgender students. They've also passed a policy on sex-based distinctions in athletics. When we get to Penridge, they have passed a lot of the same policies as Central Bucks. And we have heard at Red, Wine, and Blue other school districts, other school boards using Central Bucks as the model. These are not state policies. These are specific to each school district. So when we look at Penridge, it's a lot of the same policies, but they've also brought in something called Vermilion Education that I talked about before. So Vermilion Education is actually an offshoot of Hillsdale College. This is a very extreme conservative Christian college, and they don't necessarily teach very inclusive curriculum. So Vermilion has taken over their history curriculum for 2023. It's called the 1776 Project History Curriculum, and this is an ongoing issue in Penridge right now. So there's other parts of the state where they're using the same playbook. In Norwin School District, which is on the western part of the state, there's been attempts to ban books because they're calling it covert indoctrination. They passed a clothing policy that allows students to actually wear Confederate flags and other divisive and hateful symbols. They call it patriotic. And there was a school board member who repeatedly used the word retard, as a sitting school board director, and they defended it at the school board level. They didn't see a problem with that. So these are the people making policies for our kids. In East Penn School District, there's a very active Moms for Liberty presence. And there are extremist candidates running on platforms of book banning CRT and SEL. There's a proposed ban on trans students competing in sports or using bathroom facilities consistent with their gender identity. And there is an extremist candidate who is sending cease and desist letters to community members and opposing candidates who have spoken out against him. This is a tactic we are seeing throughout Pennsylvania, that people who speak out against extremists are receiving cease and desist letters as well as slap lawsuits. Very scary. In East Stroudsburg, there is the chairperson of the Monroe County chapter for Moms for Liberty. You may have read about this. She was actually found guilty of harassment after she hijacked a dead woman's Facebook page and sent a barrage of hateful and harassing messages to a community member who was actively fighting against Moms for Liberty. And I mean, how horrible is that? That's what is happening in our communities. And most recently, Perkiomen Valley, which is in Montgomery County, they fast-tracked an anti-trans bathroom policy. But the good news was the community organized. They showed up. They spoke out. And at that meeting, this policy was voted down, although it was sent back to their policy committee. So it is not necessarily dead in the water. It may come back, but it was so amazing to see the community come together and really speak out. But then there were some protests by outside agitators, not necessarily people who lived within the district. And just last week, there was an actual bomb threat sent to the school district that specifically mentioned the bathroom policy, and that the fact that it was not passed meant that there would be harm caused. And we're not just talking about book bans here, unfortunately. We're talking about some real extremism. And I agree, good state laws would make a difference. So how do we fight back? What I'd like to remind all of us is that they are the loud minority, we are the majority. There was an Ipsos poll conducted. 77% of parents strongly agree that classrooms should be places for learning, not political backgrounds. 68% of parents feel that laws banning books and making it illegal for teachers to talk about LGBTQ or racial issues are being driven by politicians. 74% of parents agree that politicians are using children as political pawns. Political pawns are children. And conversely, Very few parents, just 32%, think it's important for elected leaders to focus on passing laws which govern which topics can and can't be discussed in classrooms. So how do we fight this? First of all, do not repeat disinformation. Multiple studies have shown that statements like teachers aren't groomers or the school library doesn't have pornography, this is counterproductive, because all people hear if you repeat it and repeat it is something about the library has pornography, teachers are groomers. They're not hearing the opposite of that. So instead, you could say something like, I believe students should learn accurate history. Teaching them fairy tales does not prepare them for the future to be successful. All students should feel welcome and accepted at school. No one should be told their stories and history is inappropriate. But also don't ignore the disinformation. Meet it head on. When someone says to you, oh, there's pornography in the library, tell them, I think you might have heard some disinformation. There's a lot of bad information out there. I'd like to set the record straight. And then move on and explain. It's just a nicer way to meet people where they are. And then, use your beliefs. Every one of our schools includes students who are LGBTQ+. Multiple studies have shown that learning that everyone deserves respect creates a safer environment for all students, whether or not they're part of that community. And stay focused. While we would ultimately like there to be some federal legislation about this and certainly some state legislation, right now we have to stay focused on the local, because that's where we can make immediate change right here, right now in Pennsylvania in November. So again, if we're going to be making everyone aware of these issues at the school board level, we also believe that's going to drive voter participation up the ballot too, because we have a lot of important races in Pennsylvania. But for low information voters, meeting them where they are, like hearing that, oh, state Supreme Court, they might not understand or realize why that's so important. You can explain all that to them, but you might be able to actually get them out to cast their vote based on things happening in your direct community. So how do we do it? We rally our squad at Red, Wine, and Blue. And we use something called relational organizing. And it's the simple proven concept that people talking to their friends and family is more effective than strangers talking to strangers. So what we want you to do and what we will train you to do is talk to your friends and families about all of these tough topics if you come to our trainings. And that way you will be equipped to have these conversations with your friends and family and make sure that they understand what is at stake. So last year we used a program called Rally. It is an online tool, and what it does is it matches when you join Rally, you can then enter your friend's information. It matches them to the voter file, and then it gives you actionable tasks to send to your friends, however you normally talk to them, whether it's in person, on the phone, text messages, in social media. We give targeted information about specific races so that you can share all the information with your friends. We used this last year, and I'm going to toot our own horn right now. And so people who volunteered and used this rally program increased voter turnout by 13.8%. And then their volunteer contacts, it increased by 9.6%. And it cut through partisan lines because nobody likes extremism except extremists. So 28.1% of our voter contacts were Republican and unaffiliated, which is amazing. And we're trying to reach our like-minded friends, talk to them. You might think that they're voting, you might think that they understand, they may not. Our moderate and non-political friends. These are our friends who don't pay a lot of attention. They're those friends that talk to you because they know that you're the one who's in the know. And these aren't necessarily people that you have to persuade, but a lot of times they are. But we are going to completely ignore the extremists because we're not going to change their mind. But remember, they're the minority. As long as we get our like-minded friends and family to the polls, we will win. And I just have some information here. You could scan the QR code. I think my colleague Amanda dropped some links in the chat. And I believe that is it. So thank you very much. I am so appreciative of this time that you've given me, and I would like to just give one last plug this evening. We happen to be having a program online virtual called Moving Beyond Censorship, and it's before Ban Book Week, which is coming up next week. And we are hosting Senator Amanda Capoletti, who will be talking about the legislation she introduced, as well as Patrick Sweeney, who is the political director for Every Library, and Kathy Furman, who is a school librarian in Pennsylvania. So love to see you tonight if you're available. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ronna. You know, as I go around and I do in-person discussions with many groups, and I had 2 in the last week. One of the things that people always say to me is, the first they hadn't heard about Represent before because I was meeting with their friends. And so we do our own version of relational organizing. But the other thing is people are looking for ways to get involved, and they want to know what kinds of groups are out there, who can help me, how do I get to know what's going on? And that's why we had you on today. And it was just, I learn a lot every time I go through these things. And Ronna, thank you for all the work you're doing in Pennsylvania. We're going to shift gears a little bit, but Ronna is going to stay on. And as you have questions, be sure and put them in the chat, and we'll get to them as part of our program. But this is just so important that you all understand this. And that's why we appreciate your being out here this morning. Susan Spicka, excuse me. Susan Spicka, would you like to tell us what's going on with the education voters of Pennsylvania and what your work involves and what you want out of our listeners today?
Absolutely. And I do not have the pretty slides like Ronna has, so I'm just going to talk to you. I hope that is okay. And I want to like endorse Ronna as a great person to work with. We work with Red, White, and Blue on the school board extremism side of things. And Red, White, and Blue is a solid organization that will help people navigate really, really heavy, difficult situations. So I'm here with Education Voters of Pennsylvania. We are a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. Our mission is to ensure that elected officials support a pro-public education agenda. And I came into this work back in 2011 when Governor Corbett had proposed $1 billion in cuts. And a group of people in my community went to our school board meeting. And I live in Shippensburg, which straddles Cumberland and Franklin counties. And we went in and we said, we're seeing that our school district's going to lose $1 million in state funding. And, you know, the 9 old white school board members looked at us and basically said, little ladies, what do you think is going to happen if the state cuts $1 million? We're going to have to cut from our school district. We can't raise it on the local level. And so we went back to my living room and we were like, no one's talking about this. What are we going to do? This is going to be devastating. We said, why don't we go and have a bake sale in Harrisburg, because no one is paying attention to this. And if we had to raise this money at the local level as a group of moms of little kids, we'd have to have a bake sale. So we went to Harrisburg and we held a mock bake sale, and we said, we need to sell 2.4 billion cookies to make up for the $1.2 billion that Governor Corbett is proposing to cut from our schools. And when I was there, a representative from Education Voters came and said, hey, you look like a pretty good advocate. We would like to work with you. You know, this one event is a good thing, but a one-off is not going to probably move the needle. We would like to help you form an organization that can have a more long-lasting impact. And so Ed Voters helped me form a little grassroots organization in our community where we, you know, really started having community meetings, talking about public education funding, and getting people to send letters and postcards to our state lawmakers. Well, it was kind of a eye-opening for a lot of people who loved their local state lawmakers when they started getting responses back saying, what are you talking about? We didn't cut funding. You know, those schools are just full of, you know, teachers unions. The teachers union's the problem. And so I ended up in 2012 running against my own state rep because I was so bothered by this, and it was just unbelievable to me that no one was going to run against him. And so knocked 5,000 doors in Franklin County, all of Republicans. And so I just want to say to everybody here, it is God's work what you are doing. It is so important. It is really, really, really hard. Like, you are making a huge sacrifice as you do this work. And obviously I lost, but it did help, like, really frame the conversation and helped you understand when you talk to people that you share values, even if people vote one way, and that these conversations really are important. After that loss, which I knew was going to happen, I ended up becoming an advocacy coordinator for Ed Voters, working on organizing events in the mid-state. So, typically we don't look at the middle of Pennsylvania as a place where we should be doing advocacy for education. Typically it's been in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and I took over Ed Voters in 2016, and we've been working really hard to make sure that we are talking about the needs of all school districts and bringing Pennsylvanians all together around the issue of education funding. Because when in Harrisburg, they're able to pit rural communities against urban communities, which I think they have done masterfully over decades, then they win and we lose. And so we have worked hard to get to the point where we're talking about school funding for all kids, and we are all part of the same effort to get Harrisburg to do its job. So I also ran for school board. I won in 2019 by 4 votes, and then lost in 2020. No, I won in 2015 by 4 votes and lost by 10 votes in 2019. And I have to say, like, former school board member is probably my favorite title, because that is a tough job. So if you get elected to the school board, thank you again. It is really, really important work, but it can be really hard, even before all the Moms for Liberty garbage. So where are we in Pennsylvania right now? We are at, like, probably the most important moment for children that we have had in a generation, in anybody's lifetime. So I think that there are a couple things that are happening that are really important. First of all, in 2014, the families and school districts filed a lawsuit against the state alleging that our school funding system was unconstitutional. The case worked its way through the courts, and the court declared last year that, in fact, Pennsylvania's school funding system is unconstitutional. No one appealed it. The Republican defendants did not appeal it. And so right now we have a decision that says, Governor Shapiro, state legislators, get to the table, sit down, do your work, and come up with a constitutional school funding system. So right now we have a group of lawmakers. There are 3 from each house, like 3 House members for Democrats and Republicans, 3 members of the Senate for Democrats and Republicans, and 3 representatives from Governor Shapiro's office, and they are part of what we call the Basic Education Funding Commission. Governor Shapiro said in his first budget address, we all need to get to the table and we need to fix this problem. Well, this Basic Education Funding Commission is the table where lawmakers are going to either, like, actually come up with the remedy, or they're going to kick the can down the road again. And so right now, we all need to be all eyes on Pennsylvania's Basic Education Funding Commission. And I would say many, many eyes directed toward our governor, because if we have an equally balanced Republican and Democratic committee with 3 votes that belong to the governor's office obviously is the one that can kind of tilt this in one direction or the other when they make a decision and they issue their report. And so they are meeting. I'll put some links in the chat after I'm done talking. They are meeting around the state. They're going to be done meeting toward the end of November. And we are really pushing for them to issue a report with a remedy in it. So there's a form on the Basic Education Funding Commission page where regular people can submit a comment, and these little things can be incredibly important. So taking the time to spend 15 minutes to write a note about why it is time for the Basic Education Funding Commission to find a remedy for our school funding system is a very, very important investment of time, because at the end of all of this, they take everything that they find, that they get, all the input, and then they tally it up. And if the other side is is writing things in, or if they hear nothing, then they can maybe feel like it's okay to kick the can down the road. And then at that point, you know, we become in a situation in Pennsylvania, if we go for a year or two and we have a legislature and a governor who don't propose a remedy, we are going to be one of those states that gets the decisive decision that you have wanted for school funding forever. But without court enforcement and without people power forcing lawmakers to understand it's in their interest to actually come up with a remedy, it could just drag on forever and we could see very few changes, right? And so, you know what I mean? Like, we can't squander that right now. It's an important time. And I wanted to kind of address the issue of Governor Shapiro and his support for vouchers, because I think that is a really significant problem that we have right now if we want to be able to support public education. You know, when Governor Shapiro was on the campaign trail, he said that he did support school choice. It is kind of unclear where all this is coming from, but it does seem like there probably are some relationships that Governor Shapiro has with people who are very supportive of this, perhaps with donors who want to see a voucher program in Pennsylvania. And this is part of, as you know, a nationwide push for vouchers, where we have seen state after state after state implement or expand school vouchers. I think people on this call understand the existential threat that a brand new school voucher program would have on our public schools in Pennsylvania. So, you know, anybody in Harrisburg can say, it's just $100 million. It's just for the kids who need it the most. You know, it's not coming out of our education budget. It's coming from its own line item in the state budget. You know, that is how voucher programs started in other states too. They start as these little tiny programs for very targeted students. And once that camel's nose is under the tent, then any legislature that comes in that has an agenda, any new governor that comes in can just expand it. And so we've seen, I think one of the worst scenarios is what's happened in Arizona, where they started off with like a little teeny tiny voucher program, and now it's expanded to universal vouchers. And it is not only devastating public schools, it is just the griftiest program you can ever imagine. And the same thing in Florida, where like families, if they don't spend all their voucher money on the tuition for their kids' school, they can buy tickets to Disney, they can buy TVs, they can buy whatever they want. So it is both a dismantling of public education, but it is also like giving families money when they're not going to actually educate their kids. Like, think about what it means if you get your voucher and you know that you can like buy whatever you want with it instead of paying your kids' tuition bill, right? Like we're talking about a real problem. And I think that Governor Shapiro is the target of all of this. And then, you know, Democrats in the House with that one-person majority, we had a real scare this spring in the budget, where Governor Shapiro had negotiated with Senate Republicans to put a $100 million voucher program in a negotiated budget deal. And then it was hubris. A group of advocates, I don't even know what they are, like freaking gross, grifty money people, sent a letter to Governor Shapiro and to all the lawmakers saying, support this voucher program. And it included Betsy DeVos, it included Grover Norquist, it included the Commonwealth Foundation people. And it was like such a group of people that were just despicable. And once that letter was made public, PA Schools Work, our school funding coalition, we were able to like do a quick Twitter storm to like push it out there. Like, do we really want Betsy DeVos's education plan in Pennsylvania? And we had a little quote tweet where Governor Shapiro said, Betsy DeVos is the worst thing for public education, pass it on. And so we were able to, in that moment, make this voucher program toxic and unappealing to Governor Shapiro and to Democrats. And so then, you know, I think you probably all know, Democrats said, we'll pass the budget if you line item veto the vouchers, and Governor Shapiro, he did that. But that was a pause, like that was a temporary stop on vouchers, and we can expect them to come back because, you know, the Commonwealth Foundation, whatever their link that does, their group that does all the lobbying and all the puts all the money out there, they are slamming lawmakers and districts about like not providing opportunities for students. And I guess like it's just the vouchers are just such a lie also, because you know, we have $340 million in school vouchers in Pennsylvania today that most people don't even know that we have. So we have this educational improvement tax credit and opportunity scholarship tax credit programs that I'm going to put information in the chat. If you want to know, if you want to talk about like one of the least accountable, like really most open to waste, fraud, and abuse programs in Pennsylvania, it is our tax credit scholarship programs, which were started 20 years ago. We have spent $2 billion on school vouchers in Pennsylvania already, and it is $340 million a year already that we spend on a program that businesses and individuals can donate money to scholarship organizations instead of paying their taxes. And then that money is then used to pay for scholarships for students in private schools. The scholarship organizations get to just skim 20% off the top, no reporting for how they spend it. So you think about $340 million of this money, it's $68 million a year that's just in a black hole. The family income limits are $130,000 for a family of 4, which is 500% the federal poverty limit. It is the highest family income limit of any voucher program in the United States that has an income limit. There's virtually no reporting. We don't know anything about academic achievement, and we do know that a lot of this money is going to private Christian schools that have heinous policies, like policies where if a girl is pregnant, she has to go before the board of the school, and she has to like basically confess that she is pregnant, and she is forced to go to Christian pregnancy counseling or face expulsion. She is forced to have the baby, and then the next year the school can decide that they don't want to readmit her. That is a school that is currently on our voucher receiving list, right? So it is a terrible program. And so I think as we look forward to talking about school vouchers, one way to look at this is to say, like, we have $340 million in school vouchers already. We need to do a deep dive on like accountability for this program before we start a new voucher program. And I think Governor Shapiro has been known for, you know, in his office as the AG, like accountability and responsibility and taking a look at this. And so I really think that like we're going to have to like change this conversation around vouchers to, you know, looking at this and then hoping that we can keep this voucher program toxic to people in Harrisburg, because once it goes in, it will be in for a long time. So I think I've got other resources that I'll put in the chat, but I will say one thing Ed Voters does is we are kind of dogged in some of our issues that we follow. And so one of them is cyber charter funding. And so if you're running for school board, we have fact sheets that say how much each school district has spent on supporting cyber charter schools. So a kid leaves a school district, goes to a cyber charter school, the district pays tuition for each of those kids. The tuition's based on what it costs to educate a kid in a brick and mortar building. So these cyber charter schools reap massive profits, and they just waste ungodly amounts of tax dollars. And the tax dollars come directly from school districts. So we're raising property taxes. Those cyber charter schools can do God knows what with hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And so we did actually get through the House, House Bill 1422, which is a long-awaited cyber charter reform bill. And it was bipartisan support. So there were 20 votes from Republicans. And that's an example of a bill. We know if we can get the Senate Education Committee to move it and put it into the Senate, it will pass. 93% of school districts in Pennsylvania have supported the same exact resolution calling for support for these reforms. And think about that. Think about these school boards and everything that's happening, and 93% of them agree that we need to reform cyber charter schools. So like, if you want a common enemy, let's have it be our cyber charter schools and our Betsy DeVos vouchers. So I'll put some stuff in the chat, but thank you.
Wow. You know, 2 great speakers today, and look at what we've learned. And this is the value of what we try and do at Represent. And yes, Susan, you can talk about a law passing the House and just need the Senate Education Committee to take it up. we've had, if you go back into our archives of past events, Lindsay Williams has been on, and Lindsay is the minority lead of the Senate Education Committee, and nothing will get through that group. As I mentioned, we've had over 100 bills pass our House this year. Nothing is getting through the Senate of importance. The one thing the Senate did approve was the $100 million of the funding for charter schools and for and I'm a little more critical of Governor Shapiro than perhaps Susan is being right now. He thought this was his compromise bill. He thought that this was going to happen. He thought if he put it in there, this was the Tom Wolfe philosophy, is don't negotiate with the Democrats, negotiate with the Republicans. And then when you get something and the Republicans have leadership in both chambers, it'll just get passed. And that's not going to work. And you know why it's not going to work anymore? Because Joanna McClinton is Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania. Joanna has I know. And Joanna has, it's 102 to 101 are the numbers after the last special election. It's a very tight majority, but it's enough to get laws passed. It's enough to get things through. And Susan also mentioned that a number of Republicans have supported the law she was referring to about charter schools. I think that's great because they want to be able to go back to their district and say that, hey, I'm one of the good Republicans. I vote on these things. But the Senate leadership will never bring up that bill. It just won't happen because they know it'll lose, and they know that their funders and some of their big funders, like Jeff Yass and others in Pennsylvania, are not going to allow this to happen. And the only way to change that is by giving Joanna a bigger majority in the House and by giving putting a majority of Democrats in the Senate. And that's just the way it is. So does anybody have any other questions? Anybody want to chime in? Anybody want to say something to Ronna or Susan besides thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for organizing. Tiffany, were there any other questions in the chat we should be looking at?
There was one question about vouchers paying for Catholic schools or religious schools. But I would have to find it. Yeah,
no, they do. It's they do fund religious schools.
In fact, I would say probably 80% of the schools that get vouchers, the current vouchers, are religious, and the Catholic schools are a big part of it. But people who don't live out where I live, I said I'm going to just look at the 3 schools that are on the voucher list that are within 5 miles, a 5-mile radius of my house, and they all of them require like a pastor referral or require you to check a box saying that you agree that marriage is between a man and a woman and that there are 2 genders. You know what I'm saying? Like these are the majority of actual numbers of schools if you get outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Scranton and you know what I mean, the big cities. It's the only choice families have, right? And we've done a lot of digging into them, and having kids sit in a cubby with a homeschool curriculum that they read by themselves that is from the Abeka Christian nationalists and being told that they're going to memorize Bible verses as their education, that is what vouchers fund. They do not fund increasing student achievement for students and for children. They fund that type of education for a huge number of kids.
And because the state doesn't specifically foster a particular religion, these are considered private schools, and therefore they can teach what they want. And that's why it's not a church-state issue. Could we repeat in the chat, please, the information about Rally, because somebody was asking about relational organizing. Also, if Susan or Ronna, can you tell me whether on your websites, whether you have information about what you want people to say when they call Shapiro's office or when they get campaign messages from him? What would you like him to say? What would you like people to say in their comments to this commission that's looking at school funding? Are there scripts in there? Are there things in particular you want us to say?
So I would say, number one, the Basic Education Funding Commission needs to come up with a plan. And I actually have a 1-pager here that I can put in the chat, and we've got 4 points. And that we need to ensure that we have constitutional funding for our public schools before anybody even begins to like talk about having a new voucher program to Governor Shapiro, and that we need to have adequacy targets, and we need to meet our adequacy targets for every school district. So I'll try to dig out this one pager.
Thank you. It's going to be interesting to see what that commission comes up with, because it is billions of dollars. And oh, guess what? We have billions of dollars of surplus money sitting in the the bank in Harrisburg right now. We've had discussions on here in the past on education funding and talked about other sources of education. It's not just your state taxes that could go up. There's been discussions about repealing the Delaware tax loophole, which, you know, Pennsylvania corporations that are registered, even if they're physically in Pennsylvania, drive on our roads, hire our people, use our services. If they're registered in Delaware, they don't have to pay Pennsylvania taxes. Getting rid of loopholes like that will make a big difference in the amount of funding that could be available to our schools.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is outside kind of what we were talking about, but it's looking at in a different I'm looking at the homeschoolers and how we could get our homeschoolers to kind of rally with us. I used to be a homeschooler. I'm on the school board now. And someone that I homeschooled with years ago, she's part of Moms for Liberty. And I'm not sure how that happened. And so there's a lot of reason why people homeschool. And it was not for those reasons at all for me. We lived in Altoona School District at the time, and I had 5 Black African-American kids, and I just felt like the curriculum was not addressing their needs. So that was my reason for homeschooling. But I think that we're losing, if we don't reach out to homeschoolers, I think that we're losing them. And I think, we mentioned about all the stuff that the charter school provides. One of the questions that I asked is that why can't we provide some of the Chromebooks or something like that to our homeschoolers? Because sometimes the homeschoolers just do that, and the charter schools, which take money away from us because they get these things that we're paying for through the school district anyway. Right. So I don't know why we isolate them. They should be working with us. And I think that this is an issue that I don't think a lot of people are addressing. I've gone to both sides. I understand homeschoolers, and I'm on the school board.
Well, thank you, Carlene. I think that's a great program and a great question that you've asked. And Ronna or Susan, would you like to address the homeschool issue?
So I'm just not sure how to find homeschool families, right? Like, so I'm not sure how to actually reach out to them. And, and I do think, Carlene, you're correct that there is a vast difference in some groups of homeschool students and in others, but right. Many of them are finding that, and frankly, like, we have all these homeschoolers here, and I went to ballet and watched my daughters and I sat with parents in a room as they were homeschooling their kids by telling them to memorize the multiplication table by looking at the numbers, not by learning patterns or doing anything like that. And so a lot of them have now found that cyber charter schools will provide them with resources and education. And I have to say, for some of the homeschool kids around here whose mothers never graduated from a real high school, who have very little education themselves, at least the kids who go to a cyber charter school are getting access to actual real education and actual real teachers. So do you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? I think there's a whole array, and I do understand my homeschool families go to the cyber charter schools. I wish that they were not so overfunded and so grifty and wasted so much money. But at least for these kids who I see, the Christian kids who are being isolated from society in these homeschool pods, at least they're getting some type of interaction outside of their really insular little community.
Well, thank you. And I think that
may I jump in? Yeah, I just wanted to say, Carlene, thank you for your question. And if we go back to what I was talking about, relational organizing, that's how we can find the homeschool parents who might want to be a part of, a more equitable education for all. So yeah, I would say just reach out to everyone you know and have the conversations.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your answers.
Thank you. And And I want to thank everybody for being on this call today. I always learn a lot. And I think you all have too. And the passion that you're seeing and the number of women who've called in and are here, men and women, it is stunning. But we have to use this energy to move on. This isn't just, oh, wasn't this a nice hour? It was an interesting hour, but what are you going to do about it is the big question. And how are you going to act? And you've got some resources in the chat. When Tiffany sends out a follow-up from this call to thank you for coming, it will include some of the links that we talked about in the chat so that you'll have it and you'll know where to go with this. So Tiffany, let's go back to our closing slides. Have I mentioned that it's a very, very tight majority in the House, and the Senate is, nothing is going to get through that Senate of any importance to many of the people on this call. So we need to flip the Senate. The good news is Represent supports women who want to make a change. We've been an active part of the getting to the majority in the House, and we've got some great candidates in the Senate that we want to support. But we want to give them early money in order to make sure that our kind of candidates are on the ballot next November. Mentioned we've had some special election victories. There's going to be more special elections coming up, and every one of these, in every one of these, the majority is in question, is on the table. I like to talk about these breakfast briefings as being the Represent PA form of civic education. We want to tie the issues that you care about to action and inaction in Harrisburg. But I need some help. I need some help knowing what subjects you want to cover. This one today came about because I've had conversations with Ronna Dewey over time, and she said, hey, let's talk about education funding. And she proposed Susan as a speaker, and I didn't know Susan. And wasn't this a wonderful hour? Didn't you learn a lot? And aren't you activated even without getting that extra cup of coffee so far? Whose work should we highlight? What organizations? I knew that we should highlight Ronna. Ronna knew we should highlight Susan. That's our own version, again, of our relational organizing. But what are the issues you care about? And please send us an email, info@representpa.org. Let us know that there's something that you are working on, something you care about, something you want to help us organize, and we'd be happy to do it. Tuesday, November 14th, we're going to have a room for 30-something people. We don't want to be overstressed in our room because of COVID, but we want to make sure we bring people to Harrisburg with us. We're going to bring in House and Senate leaders to talk about the work we're doing now. Many of you don't get to see these leaders because you're in different parts of Pennsylvania, or the groups you're in don't chat with the legislators. We want to meet many of the wonderful women we've helped elect and get inspired. And you're going to hear from the campaign plans of both the House and the Senate caucuses about what's going on and how they're going to increase the majority in the House and how they're going to increase the majority in the Senate. But it's going to take money and it's going to take action. Did I mention that we need volunteers? I just was talking about, one of the things I want to do is make sure that we've got support for our breakfast briefings. And so I make sure that the topics are of interest to all of you. We also have started doing our fundraisers for the next year. I mentioned that we did 2 in the last week in the Philadelphia area. Both of them raised funds for us, but both of them introduced us to new people. The good news is we meet people who say, I've never heard of you, and I really want to support you and know more about what Represent does. And a couple, as I mentioned, a few of the people I met this week, I've seen their names on today's call. And that's the good news. The bad news is I'm still meeting people who say they've never heard of Represent PA, and their friends of friends. So be sure and reach out to your friends, talk about this. I'd like to appear in living rooms all over the Delaware Valley or all over Pennsylvania. We're planning some events in Western PA, but if you know someone in the middle part of the state who wants to do something for us, we can make it happen. Every dollar we raise by right now we've already raised enough money this cycle to cover all of our expenses. We're a volunteer organization. We have one paid part-time employee who's our operations manager. We do pay for we have to pay for our internet support and our email support, but all of those funds have been raised by our regular donors. So every dollar we raise between now and election day in 2024 is going to candidates. I like to tell people that I live in Philadelphia, and I live in the Delaware Valley, and I'm always going to be represented by Democrats because it's a Democratic district that I live in. But if I want to change Pennsylvania, I need to invest in races in other parts of the state. I need to make my voice heard in other parts of the state. Yes, I can make sure that I vote. Yes, I can make sure that my candidate is going to win. But we need a majority in other parts of the state. And we've picked up a lot of seats over the last few years in areas that have turned blue. But there's an awful lot of areas in the state that are 50-50, and we've got a chance of winning these seats, particularly in the Senate. We have a chance of winning these seats, but it's going to take money and support. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. And it's right at 9:30. We made it. So thank you, everybody. And again, thank you, Susan and Ronna, for all you do and for helping all of us in Pennsylvania.